Hello, this is Brian Edward with Myth Informed. Next to me is Antonio Blandone, and this is Take Two. But we are with Gad Saad, a Canadian professor of psychology that's credited with founding the field of evolutionary consumerism. He holds the Concordia University Research Chair in Evolutionary... I always get that word wrong. Evolutionary Behavioral Science. He's a member of the IDW and podcast creator called The Sad Truth. He's got a new book out called The Parasitic Mind. So why did we pick Parasitic Mind?
So there are many animals that become parasitized by all sorts of parasites. Neuroparasites are the ones that end up in the host's brain. So, for example, if you take Toxoplasma gondii, it's a parasite that afflicts a mouse, and when the mouse is afflicted with that particular parasite, it loses its innate fear of cats, and it actually becomes sexually attracted to the cat's urine. Not a very good outcome for a mouse. And just to give you one other example before I link it to my book, there's another type of parasite that afflicts ungulates, deer, moose, elk. And when they are afflicted with the parasite, they start going around in circle, unable to extricate themselves from this motor pattern. Even as the looming predators are coming on them, they can't extricate themselves from this pattern. And so I argue in my book that in the same way that we have all of these actual physical brain worms that can cause animals to behave maladaptively, humans can suffer from a second class of parasites. I call them idea pathogens. These are bad ideas that can metaphorically make us go around in circle as the looming dangers are coming at us. So that's why I call it the parasitic mind.
Okay. I have a question regarding these types of ideas. Do you dissect in your book types of ideas that are infectious in nature? Because you have idea pathogens being a tyranny of common sense. So is this like commonsensical ideas as related to Western culture, or are you seeing patterns here in the types of ideas that humans get attached to and attacked by?
Right. So the idea pathogens that I specifically cover in the book all stem from one particular ecosystem. In the same way that when we're talking, say, about the COVID-19 virus, we look, where did it originate? Where did it come from? Where is its geographic origin? Well, I use the same epidemiological model to find out where did these idea pathogens come from. And regrettably, I say regrettably because I'm a professor, I'm here to tell you that all of these bad ideas originate from the university ecosystem. It takes intellectuals to come up with really, really dumb ideas. And so the next question might be, what are examples of these idea pathogens? I can certainly discuss a few with you. The granddaddy of all idea pathogens is undoubtedly postmodernism. It is what I call a form of intellectual terrorism, because postmodernism basically negates the possibility that there are universal truths. It basically says that everything is subjective. There are no objective truths. So as you might imagine, this is anti-scientific because scientists do believe in truths. We do wake up in the morning hoping to uncover some truth. Now, truths might change. What we thought was true 500 years ago in science is no longer true today, but we do think that there are truths. So you might imagine how, if you're inculcating generations of students with an idiotic idea like there are no objective truths, how that can lead to all sorts of nihilistic craziness.
Is this a specific attack to the Enlightenment period?
It is, because so other idea pathogens other than postmodernism would be, for example, identity politics, right? Identity politics is actually rooted in something that is anti-Enlightenment, right? I mean, or if you think of classical liberalism, it's about elevating individual dignity, whereas identity politics and its offshoots like diversity, inclusion, and equity, which I refer to as the die religion, has now seeped its way across all of academia. So we no longer now give professorships as a function of how impressive your academic dossier is, but rather whether you have certain immutable traits. Are you the right skin color? Are you the right sexual orientation? And so on. So it is antithetical to everything that we would have thought is inherent to a enlightened society. We are regressing back to 100 years ago.
Yeah. And when you get these things like that Brett Weinstein talked about, like to ask for evidence of racism is racism with a capital R, are ideas that I agree, they need to be rejected. And clearly they have some replication because it seems to be spreading. But how is it different than, say, religion? Is religion a mind virus? I think Richard Dawkins had a book like that.
Mm-hmm. Right. So other people have talked about mind viruses or memes. I think in this case, what I'm referring to is the reason why I use the analogy, the biological analogy of a parasite. It's because a meme could be something quite innocuous, right? So, for example, if I start singing a song and you hear me singing it, you might start singing it as you're walking off. And so I have transferred my meme onto you. So a meme doesn't have to be negatively valenced. It could be positively valenced, it could be neutral, it could be negatively valenced. Religion, we can argue whether it is positive or negative, but in the case of these parasitic idea pathogens, they really do lead us to the abyss of infinite lunacy. So in the same way as the mouse, the hapless mouse, that runs towards the cat because it is sexually attracted to its urine, this is, for example, what happens with political correctness, right? I analogize it as similar to the, I don't know if you know the spider wasp. The spider wasp is a parasitic wasp that stings a spider, rendering it zombified. It then carries it into its burrow, lays an egg on it, and then as the egg hatches, it eats the spider that's still live in vivo. Well, that's what political correctness does to us. It zombifies us, nullifies us, and leads us to the abyss of infinite lunacy. So there are really wonderful analogies between these two mechanisms.
Yeah.
Now, is this taken over because of people's good nature? I think we've had this conversation in the past before that, people want to do the right thing. People want to, open up, their houses and their ideas and their minds and their friendships to many different ideas, but what is the weapon to fight back against political correctness, for example?
So there are different possibilities. Maybe we can get the engineer to stop going back and forth in view because it's very distracting. Is that possible?
Okay, yeah. So hey, Sean, just just pull back because he's seeing you on the camera.
Oh, he's seeing you over there. Yeah.
I mean, it's not really helping the conversation, right? So first, maybe what I could mention is that the idea pathogens, many of them start with a noble cause, right? So for example, social constructivism is an idea pathogen that I discuss in my book. What is social constructivism? It is basically the idea that we are all born with empty minds. We don't have any biological imperatives in our brains that we're born with. We're all born with equal potentiality. Any of us could have been the next Lionel Messi or Albert Einstein or Michael Jordan. And it is only socialization that made Mordecai Silverstein not be as good as Michael Jordan. Well, that's a noble and hopeful premise, right? Because it tells parents, hey, parents, your kid could grow up to be anything that you can, socialize him or her to be. But it is a perfectly false, nonsensical position, right? Let me give you another example. Cultural relativism is the idea that who are we to judge other cultures? Well, that originally started with a bunch of anthropologists who wanted to remove biology from an understanding of human nature because they understood that in many cases, all sorts of really nasty folks were misappropriating evolutionary theories. Take, for example, the Nazis or eugenicists. And so they created a new edifice of bullshit because they were trying to forestall the possibility that people might misuse biology for all sorts of nefarious purposes. So all of these idea pathogens start off with a noble goal, but the reality is that in the pursuit of that noble goal, we shouldn't be murdering truth. And that's exactly what they do. Now, to answer your question of how can we inoculate ourselves against them. Well, one of the things that I argue in the book in chapter 7, I talk about what I call nomological networks of cumulative evidence. Now, bear with me. It's a mouthful just so I can explain it. So if I'm trying to prove to you that a position that I'm taking is the correct one of the ways that I can do that is by providing you with a tsunami of evidence that makes it unassailable for you to argue against me. So this is exactly what Charles Darwin did when he developed his theory of evolution. He didn't get data from one set of studies or from one place or from one discipline. He collected data from paleontology and geology and animal husbandry and comparative morphology and so on. When you put it all together, his theory became unassailable. The veracity of his theory became clear. And so I argue that this is exactly how you navigate through a lot of these contentious issues. If I want to know whether Islam is peaceful or not, I don't have to get into hysterics. I don't have to listen to George Bush or to Barack Obama. I could collect data from all sorts of different lines of evidence that could absolutely confirm whether Islam is peaceful or not. So by using this very rigorous epistemology, I could inoculate myself against these idea pathogens.
Okay. Now, how many pathogens are there? I mean, you talked specifically about postmodernism, but it seems like it's fused with either Marxism or some other components that make it an intersectionality that make it what it is today.
So there are, there's a whole bunch of idea pathogens. The ones that I focus on are specifically ones that arose from the humanities and the social sciences, but specifically the social constructivists, the one who reject biology as explaining human behavior, right? What's interesting about those folks, by the way, as I refer to them as biophobic. They're afraid of biology. So they're perfectly happy to use evolution to explain the behavior of every single species on Earth except one, humans, right? So you can use evolutionary theory to explain the behavior of the salamander, the giraffe, and your dog, but don't you dare use the same principles to explain human phenomena. So there might be a greater number of idea pathogens than the ones that I cover in the book, but the ones that I specifically cover in the book all share one thing in common, which is they want to free themselves from the shackles of reality.
Okay. What I tell people sometimes is your personality is 50% who you are, your lived experience, and the other 50% straight genetic. Am I lying to them?
It depends on which trait you're talking about. So, for example, if we talk about personality traits, they typically vary, if I remember my numbers correctly, between 30 to 80% heritable, right? So trait A might be 40% heritable, trait B might be 60% heritable, but somewhere between 30 to 80% is usually where most of these traits vary.
Okay, that sounds good. Now, when we talk about like these pathogens, is systemic racism a pathogen, or is this like the fruit of the pathogen? Is this the sepsis caused by the bacterium or whatever?
Exactly. It is. That's a great question. It's the fruit. It's the downstream sort of slippery slope consequence of these various pathogens, right? So, look, I have to find a way. Now I'm speaking. If I were a victim, I have to find a way to win in victimology poker, or what I call oppression Olympics, right? Because now what becomes the number one thing that you should achieve is not truth, but rather how can I be the greatest victim? Because that's what's rewarded on campuses, right? There's something called, for example, the progressive stack. The progressive stack basically says whether you speak and in which turn you speak at a, say, collective meeting depends on your immutable characteristics. Oh, you're a white male that's straight? Shut up, sit down. There is an indigenous person of color that has the mic, right? So that comes from identity politics. By the way, there's massive echo now. It's a disaster, guys.
The echo's back?
The echo's back. But anyways, let's keep going. What can I do?
Okay. Apologies for that. So how do you take risks when fighting back? Because this seems to be a pretty big cultural force right now. How do you calculate, your risks when you're fighting back? Things like systemic racism as it's being described today, or having gender equity in the workplace. Speaking out against this. How do you? Right. Is it worth?
But before I answer that, let me just finish the point about systemic racism. Systemic racism is an unfalsifiable position, right? There's something called falsification in science, which basically says, and this is from Karl Popper, who basically said, for something to be a scientific theory, there has to be a way to falsify it, right? The reality is there's no way to falsify systemic racism, because if I tell you that I've never been racist, that mean because I suffer from latent racism that I'm trying to hide, right? There is no way for if I love black women, then I am a racist because I'm not attracted to black women. I'm a racist because I'm not attracted. So if I'm attracted it's complete nonsensical. It again stems from these idea pathogens.
Yeah. So yeah, heads you win, tails you lose.
Well, guess what? You could challenge your friend on Facebook lightly. Fight against them. Sorry if I'm sounding hectic. It's because the echo is brutal. I'm being tortured right now.
Okay. Well, what we could do right now, since we want to make sure that you're enjoying your experience with us, we could just cut it off short here. I apologize that we're dealing with the technical issues, but honestly, again, we appreciate that you've been willing to, take such valuable time from your day to be, with us.
No problem. Cheers, guys.
Thank you, Dr. Saad. Enjoy your time with your family.
Cheers. Bye.
Thank you.